Hi everyone, welcome back to the BCS Business Technology Spreadsheets and Financial Calculators course. This is the week 6 content video, and this week we're going to be talking about how to use the calculator to find NPV, which stands for net present value, and IRR, which is internal rate of return. These are two important financial metrics that can help us to decide whether or not we should be making an investment in a business. Excuse me. So first we're going to cover net present value, and then we're going to go over IRR. There's a bunch of different pieces, but these are the two basics that we're going to go over. We're going to start with net present value. So first, what is net present value? I already talked about it a little bit, but it determines the present value of an investment, and by doing this we can decide whether or not an investment is going to be beneficial to our firm. In basic terms, NPV is the present value of our benefits of an investment minus the present value of the costs of the same investment. Why do we use it? I've already said this, but we use it if we're deciding whether or not an investment will be beneficial to our firm. Now, you'll notice, and we've talked about time value of money, but because we are calculating present values, specifically of the benefits and of the costs, we will be using a discount rate. Now, I just wanted to comment on this really quickly because this discount rate could be calculated a number of ways, and in the examples and the questions that you'll deal with in this class, you will likely just be given those discount rates. But they can be calculated using the WACC, which is our cost of capital, or looking at other investments. So if it costs us generally a certain amount to do other investments, then we'll use that as our discount rate. Or let's say we have an industry kind of average return. So those are just some basic ways to think about what the discount rate could be. And I think it'll make a little more sense as we go through kind of an example, and I'll touch on this again. But I just wanted to remind everybody that kind of what a discount rate is, and it's helping us to find the present value of money in the future. So it's going to be applied to both of these. So I think the best way to understand NPV is to do an example. So we're going to do that here. So imagine you're the owner of a small coffee shop, and you have the opportunity to purchase a new espresso machine, and it's going to cost you $1,000. You're going to be doing this because you're trying to grow your business, and you think that the espresso machine will help you to do so. So this machine will allow you to serve higher quality espresso drinks, which you expect to increase your sales. We have a discount rate of 10%. So for the next 3 years, we're expecting that this project will bring in an extra $400 in the first year, $500 in the second year, and $600 in the third year in sales. What is the NPV? Now, we explained this a little bit, but it is the present value of benefits minus the present value of the cost. So what we're going to be doing is finding the present value of each of these values in their respective years, and then subtracting the present value of this cost, and that will give us the NPV. So we just talked about this, the present value of the benefits. These are the benefits, and the present value of the cost is that $1,000. We know that because we will be theoretically investing that money today, we know the present value of the cost already. It's $1,000. We don't need to do any calculation. Now I went ahead and wanted to show what's going on inside the calculator when we are doing an NPV calculation or any present value calculation. But I just wanted to show what's going on so that you could kind of have some intuition when you're putting things into the calculator, what's going on in the background. So for year one, we see here that the amount we received is $400, which is consistent with what we know. And then it's being discounted at a 10% rate, and it's 1 year in the future. So its present value, the present value of this $400 is this $363.64. Then in year two, we do the same thing, the $500 that we expect to receive, 10% discount rate, and it's discounted for 2 years, and its present value is that $413 there. Same for the third year. Now, we add up all those present values, and we get $1,228.18. That's the present value of all the benefits that we expect to receive from this investment. Now, as we saw earlier, we'll subtract off the costs. So we subtract the present value of the cost, which we already established was $1,000. Since we will be paying that today, it's already in a present value. So 1,228 minus 1,000 gives us 228. Now, what does this even tell us? Why is this important? This is the most kind of important part about NPV, is what is it actually going to help us to do? It's helping us decide if we should accept this purchase of this new investment of this espresso machine. And since the NPV here is positive, it's a positive 228, we would accept this project. We would say that this is something that's going to bring value to our firm. So now I'm going to switch over to the calculator and show you how to do this exact same problem on the calculator. But I just want to go over the steps to doing it here first, and then we'll go and look at it on the calculator. So first we need to identify the cash flows, which we've already identified as first the 1,000, and then each of the years 400, 500, 600. Then we'll, starting at year 0, which year 0 is assumed kind of to be right now. So we're going to enter each cash flow starting at year 0. So the cash flow for year 0 will be that $1,000. Then we're going to click the CFJ key to enter in between each of the values. And this will make sense once we kind of switch over really quick here in the video. Then we're going to enter the discount rate, which we found out to be 10%. Hit the second key and then the NPV button. Now I'm going to switch over to the calculator really quick so that you can get a clear picture of how to do this there. Okay, so to explain a little bit of how to use the calculator, you'll remember that we have the cash flows of $1,000 today for our investment, and then $400 the first year, $500 in sales the second year, and then $600 in sales the third year. So how do we do that? First, I want to always encourage you to do secondary clear all. Make sure that payment per year is 1. If it's not 1, you're just going to want to click the 1, secondary, and then you can change that to 1. Now first, we know that today our year 0 cash flow, because you'll remember that the cash flows on the calculator start at year 0. So our year 0 cash flow is that $1,000 that we're going to be investing. But since we're investing it, it's going to be a negative. That's an outflow from us. We're spending that money, so it's a negative. So negative 1,000, and then we're going to go here to the CFJ key and click that. Now you'll see that it said CF0 right there. That's our time 0 cash flow. Now we know that the first year, we can just go ahead and start typing the first year here. We just type 400. That's our cash flow for the first year. Then we hit the CFJ key again. You'll see CF1. The next year is 500. CFJ key, and that's our second year. And the last year is 600, hit CFJ again. Now we have to add in our discount rate. The way we do that, we know it's 10%, so we type 10, and then go up here to the I per YR button. That's now entered. And now to calculate our NPV, we click the secondary button here, and then we go up here to the PRC, and you'll see that its secondary function is the NPV, and we click that. And our net present value is 227. You might notice that this is slightly different than the 228 that was calculated on the PowerPoint slides, but that is just a product of some rounding errors. But this gives us our net present value of essentially the exact same value, about $228. So we would accept this project because it is a positive NPV, as we think it will add value to our firm. Okay, so hopefully seeing that done on the calculator, you have a little bit of a better idea of how to actually use the calculator to do such a calculation. This longhand, doing the net present value, is something that I would not recommend you do. It takes a long time, so using your calculator and becoming good at using it to do NPV calculations is super key, and the homework for this week will help you to get comfortable doing that. Like I said, once we've calculated an NPV, we can use it to make decisions about whether or not it's a good idea to pursue a project or an investment. So if we ended up with a negative NPV, that might tell us that's an investment that we don't necessarily want to make. Now, we've talked a little bit about NPV. Let's talk about IRR. And these are two related financial metrics. So what is IRR, or internal rate of return? It's another financial metric that we use to make investment decisions, but how do we use it? Basically, IRR, it comes out once we calculate it to be a percentage return, an annual percentage return. And it helps us to compare the profitability of different projects, or to compare our profitability of one project against our discount rate, or what we think we should be earning on other investments. So the IRR gives us a number that we can use to compare against what it costs us to do the project, or a required rate of return, which is what I just said. So if our firm gives us a required rate of return and says we need to make 10% on any of the projects that we're gonna undertake this year, and we calculate the IRR of a project and it comes out to be 15%, well, we're already past that 10% that our firm told us was required, so we're going to accept that project. And if we calculated the IRR for another project and it was less than 10%, well, then we would probably not pursue that because it is not meeting the requirement that our firm gave to us. Quickly, a side note about the IRR. There is no one formula to find it. Now, this might sound a little bit weird, and I'm going to explain it just really quick. Again, I just want you to understand kind of what's going on in the background of the calculator when you're using it. IRR is found using what is called, it is an iterative calculation. Basically, what that means is you have to do a bunch of guess and check calculations to start getting closer and closer and closer to the actual IRR. Now, it takes a lot of time to go through each of those different calculations, guessing and checking, and then getting a little bit closer and doing it over and over again. So our calculator does that guess and check work for us. It makes it a lot faster. So we're not even actually going to go over what are the real nuts and bolts of IRR, because the calculator is just going to do all that heavy lifting for us. So using the same example as before, we're still the owner of that same small coffee shop. We're going to consider the opportunity to purchase a new espresso machine. It has the same cost of $1,000. We have a discount rate of 10% still, and the same cash flows. So what is the IRR? I'm going to switch back over to the calculator so that we can find it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what that IRR actually means. Before I switch over, talk about using the calculator. It's very similar to the MPV, and these are just the steps there that I will show on the video when I switch over to the calculator. So once again, whenever you start using the calculator, secondary clear, and in this case we want our payments per year to be 1, and it is right there. So to start calculating our IRR, it's basically the exact same as an MPV except for the very end. So we still have that same investment opportunity. It's going to cost us $1,000 in the first year, so we have a negative 1,000. Hit the CFJ key. We expect it to produce $400 for us in that first year, so I type 400, then hit CFJ key, enter. $500 in the second year, and $600 in the third year. Now, to calculate IRR, all we have to do is hit the secondary button and then go up here to the CST. You'll notice that the secondary function is IRR per year. We hit that, and that gives us 21.64. Now that is a percentage. That's 21.64%. So what that tells us is that the internal rate of return of this project is 21.6%. Now, going back to what I talked about a second ago, let's assume that our company gave us a 10% required rate of return. What that means is our boss is coming to us and saying, hey, if we're going to make any investments in a project this year or anything like that, it's going to have to produce at least 10% for us to consider it and for us to accept it. So this exact investment, this espresso machine, is 21%, and if they're telling us we have to make at least 10%, that tells us that we should accept this project because we're clearing that 10% already. We're at 21%. We've gone over it by 11%. So this is a project that we should highly consider accepting since it is way over our required rate of return that's been given to us. Now, hopefully you understand how to do IRR problems on the calculator and kind of how to start to interpret IRR. And I'm going to keep talking about that a little bit here. But just quickly, doing the homework this week, you'll get a lot of practice on a couple different problems of how to calculate IRR. And I think just the most important part with the calculator is just figuring out how to use all the different keystrokes so that you can get the output that you're looking for, and you'll get some practice with that. Now, continuing to talk a little bit about how to interpret IRR. Basically, and I said this a little bit, but if we get an IRR that's higher than our discount rate, then we will probably accept this project as it's beneficial to our firm. Now, one reason that we use IRR instead of NPV sometimes, or we use them in conjunction, but IRR can help us a little bit more, is if we have multiple projects and we're trying to compare them. Now, IRR makes it super easy to compare them because we are comparing apples to apples, meaning if we calculate the percentage of return that one project is going to give us, we can easily compare that against the percentage of return that another project will get us. So in this example, the espresso machine returned us 21%. And if we had a different potential investment that we were considering and it only returned us 18%, then we're going to choose the espresso machine because it's going to give us a higher rate of return. It's going to give us a higher IRR. It's a little bit hard when we're using NPV to do that because you can't just compare one number against another number of NPV because those present value calculations may be affected by if we're using a different discount rate for one project versus another. We're no longer able to compare them one with another, so we have to use IRR. Now, NPV and IRR, as you've obviously noticed already, are used to make decisions and they go together. They actually interact with each other, and I'm going to talk about this so you can kind of just have a little bit of a picture in your head of how they go together. If this doesn't totally stick, I'd rewatch it a couple times because it's hard to kind of grasp this at first. So if our NPV is 0, so if we enter in all of our cash flows, we enter in our discount rate, and we return an NPV of 0, that means our IRR is equal to the discount rate. So that means, let's say in that espresso calculation, let's say we returned an NPV of 0. Well, that would tell us that our IRR then should be 10% because our discount rate that we entered was 10%. If our NPV is greater than 0, as it was in our example, then the IRR is greater than the discount rate. So let's tie that back to the example really quick. Our NPV was $228. And our discount rate was 10%, and we saw that our IRR was 21%. So that's exactly what we expected. NPV is greater than 0, so our IRR was greater than our discount rate. Quick side note also, something important to understand, a negative NPV does not necessarily mean that we will have a negative IRR. It just means that the IRR is less than the discount rate. Now let me, again, using our example, explain that. Let's say we returned a negative $10 on our NPV for the espresso machine. That doesn't necessarily mean that our IRR is going to be a negative amount. It just means it's going to be less than our discount rate, which was 10%. So maybe that negative 10, our IRR would have been about, let's say 9%. Let's just say it's around there, 9%. That just means that our IRR is less than our discount rate. Now, if a project has a negative NPV, like we were just talking about, we might still accept it. So let's say that espresso machine was a negative NPV. It has that 9% or whatever IRR that's less than our 10%. Maybe we will still accept it if it's the best option out of a range of potential investments. So let's say we're considering 2 different investments. One of them returns us only 5%, which is less than our discount rate. And the espresso machine returns us 9%, which is still less than our discount rate, but it's better than 5%. So we're just going to go ahead and accept the espresso machine because even though it's not meeting our discount rate, it's still the best possible option that we have. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better picture of how NPV and IRR go together. I would highly suggest, if you haven't already, go back and watch these two videos. I have them right here. There's one YouTube video here for net present value and a second YouTube video here for IRR. They'll help to hopefully fill in maybe some of the gaps in your understanding. And I would say if you go and do that, things will start to get a lot more clear. And as you work on the homework this week, things will also start to become more clear of how IRR and NPV can actually be useful to you as a business owner. And that is our content for the week.